It was supposed to be an ordinary travel day. Manny Pacquiao, dressed simply in jeans, a plain shirt, and sneakers, arrived at the airport with his family. There was no flashy entourage, no special treatment, just a man carrying his bag ready to board a flight like everyone else. At the gate, passengers lined up quietly, scanning their boarding passes one by one. Manny waited patiently with his wife and children. When his turn came, he stepped forward, offering a polite smile as he handed over his ticket. But instead of a routine scan, the gate attendant froze for a second. Her eyes flicked up and down, scanning Manny's clothes, his worn backpack, and the simplicity of his appearance. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Sir, this line is for business class," she said sharply, her voice carrying just loud enough for the people around them to hear. Manny nodded calmly. "Yes, ma'am. This is my ticket." She looked again, her eyebrows rising in disbelief. "Are you sure? Business class is expensive." "Maybe you're in the wrong line." A few passengers glanced up, sensing the tension. Some whispered, others leaned in, curious. Manny's wife shifted uncomfortably, squeezing his arm. His children looked confused, unsure why their father was being singled out. Manny, however, didn't lose his composure. He kept his tone respectful. "This is my boarding pass. I think everything is fine." But the attendant didn't stop. Instead, she raised her voice further as though trying to embarrass him. "Sir, I'll need to double-check. We don't want misunderstandings at the gate." Her words dripped with condescension as if she had already judged him unworthy of being there. The moment grew heavy. People in line began pulling out their phones, some recording, others whispering. Why is she treating him like that? Manny remained still, his calm presence in sharp contrast to her hostility. He didn't argue, didn't lash out. He simply waited, eyes steady, posture firm. And then came the turning point. A silence at the gate as everyone braced to see how this man, humiliated in front of dozens, would respond. What Manny did next left the entire gate in stunned silence. The air at the boarding gate grew tense. What should have been a simple scan of a ticket had now turned into an uncomfortable spectacle. Manny Pacquiao, world champion senator, philanthropist. Yet at this moment, just a man with his family, stood calmly as the flight attendant questioned his right to be there. She held his boarding pass between two fingers, almost as if it were dirty. "I'll need to verify this. Please step aside," she snapped, motioning him away from the boarding line. Her tone was sharp, almost triumphant, as though she had caught someone trying to sneak into a place they didn't belong. Passengers behind Manny shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned at the attendant's behavior. Others took out their phones and started recording, sensing something wasn't right. A few even whispered loud enough for Manny's children to hear. Why is she treating him like that? He already has the ticket. What's the problem? Manny's wife leaned close, speaking softly. Maybe just let it go. We don't want any trouble. But Manny shook his head gently. His eyes stayed calm, his voice steady. I'm not doing anything wrong. We'll wait. The attendant, irritated by his composure, doubled down. Sir, I don't think you understand. Business class is not for everyone. If you can't prove this is your seat, you'll have to move. The words hung in the air. Passengers gasped quietly. The arrogance in her tone was undeniable. Manny didn't flinch. He clasped his hands together in front of him, breathing slowly. Years of discipline in the boxing ring had taught him patience, control, and dignity. He would not be baited into anger. I've already given you my ticket, he said firmly but respectfully. That should be enough. The attendant rolled her eyes and turned to a colleague. Call security. We'll have him checked. This was too much for the bystanders. A young man near the front of the line spoke up. He has a ticket. You can see it right there. Why are you treating him like that? Others began to murmur their agreement. Phones were now recording from multiple angles. The atmosphere at the gate shifted. It was no longer just Manny against the attendant. It was Manny and a growing crowd against blatant disrespect. But Manny didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet strength filled the space more powerfully than shouting ever could. He looked at the attendant with calm eyes. Respect is free, he said softly. It costs nothing to treat people fairly. The line went silent. The passengers stopped whispering. Even the attendant faltered for a split second before regaining her composure. Sir, please don't lecture me, she snapped, though her voice was shakier now. Just step aside until this is sorted. Manny's children held tightly to their mother, sensing the weight of the moment. To them, this wasn't just about a flight. It was about watching how their father handled injustice with dignity. The tension hung heavy, thick enough to be felt by everyone in the gate area. Security had been called, bystanders were recording, and the arrogant attendant was pushing the situation further than she realized. And through it all, Manny stood like a rock, calm, patient, and unyielding. Have you ever seen someone unfairly judged or humiliated by authority? Where are you watching this from? Share your thoughts below, because what happens next will change everything. The gate area buzzed with an uneasy energy. What should have been a routine boarding had transformed into a public standoff. Manny Pacquiao stood with quiet dignity, his boarding pass already presented, yet the gate attendant persisted in treating him as though he were an imposter, trying to sneak into a class above his means. Beside him, his wife's hand trembled slightly as it gripped his arm. "Manny," she whispered, her voice urgent, "please, just let's move to the side. The children are scared." The kids clung close, their eyes wide, confused by why their father was being singled out. To them, Manny wasn't the boxer, the senator, or the global icon. He was simply Papa, the man who tucked them in at night and made them laugh at the dinner table. Seeing him confronted and belittled by a stranger was both frightening and bewildering. Manny turned his head slightly, lowering his voice so only his wife could hear. "I know," he said softly, "but this isn't only about me. If I stay silent, then what does that teach them? That disrespect should always be accepted? That we should bow our heads when treated unfairly?" His words carried the weight of conviction, and though his wife still looked anxious, she understood. This was bigger than one rude employee. This was a moment his children would remember. The attendant, oblivious to the emotional turmoil, pressed forward. She folded her arms, glaring. "Sir, you're holding up the line. People are waiting. If you can't provide further proof that you belong in business class, you'll have to move aside." Manny remained unshaken. The boarding pass is proof enough. The firmness in his voice startled her. She wasn't expecting resistance. Most passengers, humiliated in front of a crowd, would have lowered their head, apologized, and moved out of the way. But Manny stood tall, his calm presence refusing to bend under the pressure. The bystanders murmured louder now. A woman in the back spoke up. "He's already shown his ticket. Why are you embarrassing him?" Another man shook his head, muttering, "This is discrimination, plain and simple." Phones continued to record. The glowing screens dotted the crowd like fireflies, capturing every moment, every word, every expression. The attendant's cheeks flushed, but instead of backing down, she raised her voice again. "Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Manny's children looked up at him, their eyes searching his face for reassurance. He gave them a gentle smile, a silent promise that everything would be okay. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "There is no need for hostility. I've done nothing wrong. My family and I have the right to board this flight the same as anyone else. We will not move aside simply because you choose to judge us by how we look." The words cut through the tension like a blade. Gasps rippled through the line. Passengers shifted, their sympathy for Manny transforming into admiration. It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about fairness, dignity, and the silent frustration many had felt in their own lives. His wife blinked back tears. The children, though still nervous, straightened their posture as though taking strength from their father's example. The attendant scoffed, but her confidence wavered. She tapped her foot impatiently as if trying to reassert control. "Security is on the way," she muttered. "We'll get this sorted out." The mention of security sent another ripple through the crowd. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked outraged. "Security? For what?" Someone shouted. "He hasn't done anything." But Manny remained unmoved. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't lash out. Instead, he placed an arm gently around his wife and drew his children closer. His calmness in the face of such blatant disrespect was more powerful than any outburst could have been. It was a standoff now. One woman, drunk on a small taste of power, against a man whose quiet integrity commanded respect. And though the attendant thought she was winning, the tide in the gate area was turning rapidly against her. The bystanders' whispers grew into open conversations. "This is going too far. She doesn't realize who he is. Even if he wasn't Manny Pacquiao, no one deserves this." The tension grew heavier with every passing second. Security was on its way. The attendant was doubling down. Manny's family was shaken yet standing tall with him. The passengers were restless, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would not be easily forgotten. And Manny, he stood calm, steady, and unflinching, like a man who had been through storms far worse than this. A man who knew that sometimes the greatest fight is not in the ring but in standing up for dignity without ever raising a fist. The gate agent thought she had the upper hand, but what happened next would not only flip the script, it would leave her wishing she had never opened her mouth in the first place. The standoff at the gate had stretched longer than anyone expected. Passengers were leaning forward, phones in hand, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Manny Pacquiao stood silently, calm and composed as the flight attendant continued to question his right to board. Her smirk had faded into a tense scowl. Every glance from the crowd made her doubt herself, though she tried to hide it. Then a young woman near the back of the line gasped quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. "Wait, is that Manny Pacquiao?" she whispered to the person beside her. The words spread like wildfire. Passengers turned, eyes widening as realization dawned. "No way, that's him," someone exclaimed. "The boxer? The senator?" A ripple of whispers traveled through the gate area, growing louder by the second. Some passengers were taking double takes, staring at the man who had been quietly standing his ground all along. Others held up their phones, whispering, "He's a legend. The world champion?" Manny, however, did not announce his identity. He didn't raise his arms or demand recognition. He remained calm, letting his actions speak louder than any fame ever could. Humility was part of his strength, a lesson he had lived his entire life. The attendant, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the growing murmur of awe around her. She continued her interrogation, unaware that her small display of power was crumbling before her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what you're trying to prove. Please step aside so we can resolve this." Manny's calm voice cut through the tension. "I'm not trying to prove anything, ma'am. I simply want to board my flight with my family without being humiliated." Even as he spoke, the murmurs around the gate grew louder. Children pointed and whispered to their parents. Strangers nudged each other, and some passengers even started clapping softly, unsure but compelled to show support. The energy in the room shifted. The tide was turning against the gate attendant. A man standing near the boarding line leaned forward, his phone raised. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Do you realize who you're speaking to?" "That is Manny Pacquiao." The crowd's whisper turned into a wave of recognition. People started saying his name aloud, some even cheering softly. "That's Manny Pacquiao. He's a world champion. He's a senator too. And a philanthropist." The gate attendant froze, her arrogance faltering. Her mouth opened and closed like she had swallowed her words whole. The display of disrespect that had seemed harmless moments ago now looked foolish, petty, even humiliating, in the eyes of everyone present. Manny, still humble, didn't raise his voice or boast. Instead, he simply smiled faintly, giving a small nod to the passengers who were now murmuring their support. His dignity was magnetic, and the contrast between his calm composure and the attendant's flustered arrogance was striking. Passengers started stepping closer, some gently questioning the attendant.
"Ma'am, is this really necessary?"
"Look at the ticket. It's valid. Why are you treating him this way?" Others held up their phones, recording the moment for social media, knowing it would go viral. The attendant's confidence crumbled further. Her smirk was gone, replaced with a tight-lipped frown. She shuffled papers nervously, clearly unsure how to regain control. Meanwhile, Manny's children whispered among themselves, eyes wide in awe. They were witnessing their father's strength, his calm defiance, and his unwavering commitment to dignity in the face of injustice. Even airport staff passing by couldn't help but notice the crowd's reaction. One uniformed agent stopped and peered at the scene, whispering to a colleague, "That's him. Manny Pacquiao, the one and only." The realization hit the gate attendant hard. The humiliation she had tried to inflict was now backfiring spectacularly. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were siding with Manny. The air was thick with tension, but now the power dynamic had shifted. The man she had tried to embarrass was admired, respected, and quietly in control. Manny glanced at his wife and children, giving them a reassuring smile. He didn't need to boast or demand recognition. His calm presence had already done what no words could. It had silenced the arrogance, rallied the crowd. and reminded everyone that dignity and humility often speak louder than anger or aggression. As murmurs continued to ripple through the gate area, one passenger muttered under their breath, "She doesn't even know who she's dealing with." And in that moment, the balance of power had shifted. The once confident attendant was on the defensive, and Manny's quiet strength had begun to turn the tide, a tide that would soon wash away the humiliation entirely. She thought she could intimidate him, but what happens next will not only humble her, it will leave everyone at the gate in awe of Manny's courage and integrity. The murmurs at the gate had grown into a chorus of astonishment. Passengers whispered to each other, phones were raised high, and the air was thick with anticipation. The once confident gate attendant now shifted nervously, sensing the tide had turned against her. Yet she tried to maintain control, her voice tight with frustration. "Sir," she said, her tone forced, "you've caused enough of a scene. Step aside so we can finish this properly." Manny Pacquiao, calm and unflinching, looked directly at her. His eyes, steady and unwavering, held the quiet authority of a man accustomed to challenges, in the ring, in politics, and in life. But this challenge was different. There were no punches to throw, no laws to debate, just the simple, powerful act of standing up for what was right. "I have done nothing wrong," Manny said, his voice soft but firm, carrying clearly across the gate. "All I have asked is to be treated with respect. Is that too much?" The words hung in the air. A few passengers nodded, murmuring in agreement. The tension that had gripped the room began to shift. The crowd, initially silent observers, were now emotionally involved. They had seen the humiliation, felt the injustice, and now witnessed someone confronting it without raising his voice. Manny took a deep breath. Every person here deserves respect regardless of how they look, where they come from, or how much money they have. Treating someone differently because of appearance or assumptions is wrong, and we all know it. The gate attendant's cheeks flushed bright red. She opened her mouth, perhaps to interrupt, but no words came out. Manny's calm authority had filled the room, and even her confidence faltered under its weight. A few passengers stepped forward. "She's wrong," one said. "He's done nothing." "Exactly," another chimed in. "And you're embarrassing yourself now." Manny nodded slightly, acknowledging the crowd's support without gloating. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what is right." Standing silent when someone is humiliated only lets injustice continue. The words resonated throughout the gate area. Whispers turned into soft applause, then louder, hesitant claps. People began murmuring about fairness, respect, and dignity. For some, it was a reminder of the many times they had been judged unfairly, and it stirred a deep sense of solidarity with Manny. The attendant finally attempted to regain control. "Security will handle this," she said, trying to regain her authority, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The crowd ignored her, their attention entirely on Manny and the calm power he exuded. Manny, sensing that the lesson had already begun, continued. "We should not judge anyone by their clothes, their appearance, or their perceived status. We should judge them by their actions, their character, and how they treat others." Passengers were now nodding, some clapping softly again. Even the children of other travelers were watching quietly, sensing the weight of the moment. Manny's own children clung to him, eyes wide, learning an unspoken lesson in courage and moral strength. The gate attendant, realizing her attempts at intimidation had completely failed, glanced around nervously. The murmurs had grown into open conversations about fairness and respect. Even nearby staff whispered to one another, shaking their heads. It was clear that the power dynamic had shifted entirely. Manny straightened, his voice carrying a final, firm message. "Respect is not something we earn by titles or money. It is given freely, and it must be given equally. Let us remember that as we treat one another today and every day." Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the gentle rustle of boarding passes and the soft clicks of recording phones. The gate attendant, her face pale and rigid, finally stepped back. She no longer held the power she thought she had. The crowd, inspired by Manny's dignity, now held the moral high ground. Passengers began to murmur their admiration openly. "He handled that perfectly," one said. "Without anger, without yelling. Incredible." "Look at him," another whispered, "teaching respect and humility without even trying." Manny's family, still holding on to each other, exhaled slowly, relief mixed with pride. They had witnessed not just their father defending his rights, but teaching a powerful lesson about justice and dignity in the process. And in that moment, it was clear. The standoff at the gate was no longer about boarding a flight. It was about integrity, fairness, and the courage to confront injustice calmly, firmly, and without malice. The crowd now knew the truth. But when Manny's real identity was revealed, the gate attendant would face the full weight of embarrassment, and the entire airport would witness a moment of justice that went far beyond one flight. The gate area, once tense with confrontation, was now vibrating with anticipation. Passengers murmured among themselves, sharing what they had recognized in hushed tones. Manny Pacquiao had stood his ground with dignity, challenging disrespect without raising his voice. Yet, many still didn't know the full extent of his fame until that moment arrived. One passenger, unable to contain excitement, stepped closer to the attendant and whispered, "Do you realize who you're humiliating? That is Manny Pacquiao, the world champion, senator, and philanthropist." The words hung in the air like a spark, setting off a chain reaction. Heads turned, eyes widened, and phones were raised even higher. The murmurs grew into whispers, the whispers into soft gasps, and then into quiet applause. Even the airline staff nearby paused. A supervisor, drawn by the commotion, approached and immediately recognized the man standing calmly at the center of the crowd. "Sir, you are Manny Pacquiao?" he asked, his voice full of awe. Manny nodded gently, smiling faintly. There was no boastfulness in his expression, only calm, quiet dignity. "Yes," he replied softly. The gate attendant's face went pale. Her arrogance, which had carried her through her interactions, crumbled instantly. The power she had tried to wield now felt hollow and meaningless in the face of Manny's presence, and the realization that she had publicly humiliated a global icon. Passengers, many of whom had already begun quietly supporting Manny, now erupted into open acknowledgement and admiration. "It's him," someone shouted. "The real Manny Pacquiao." Another voice added, "That's incredible. And she was treating him like this?" The attendant stammered, trying to find words, but none came. Her previous attempts to intimidate were now entirely exposed. Security staff, called earlier by the attendant, arrived on the scene, but even they stopped in their tracks, stunned by both the recognition and the supportive crowd surrounding Manny. One of the airline supervisors stepped forward, addressing the crowd first, then the attendant. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this situation has gone far enough. You will step aside and handle this professionally, immediately." The gate attendant's attempts to regain authority fell flat. Every person present now knew she had overstepped, and her embarrassment was magnified by the presence of the man she had tried to humiliate. The quiet respect Manny commanded contrasted starkly with her flustered demeanor. Manny, ever humble, did not gloat. He gently placed a hand on his wife's shoulder and smiled at his children, who were beaming quietly. Turning back to the crowd, he addressed them with his calm, commanding presence. Respect should be given to everyone, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what they do for a living, he said. Today's lesson is not about who I am, but about how we treat one another. Dignity, fairness, and humility are never out of style. The crowd erupted into applause. Strangers cheered and clapped, phones continued to record, and the children of bystanders watched with awe as a living example of courage and grace unfolded before them. Even the airline staff and supervisor nodded, acknowledging that the situation had been mishandled. The gate attendant, realizing the gravity of her actions, finally stepped aside quietly. There was no excuse that could erase the moment. Her attempt at humiliation had backfired spectacularly. Passengers began speaking to each other about the lessons they had just witnessed. "It's incredible how calm he stayed," one said. "Without raising his voice, he taught everyone a lesson about dignity." another added. Manny's response was simple, yet powerful. He had not reacted with anger, but with patience, humility, and moral strength. In doing so, he had shifted the narrative entirely, from humiliation to respect, from tension to admiration, from confrontation to inspiration. The supervisor turned to the attendant once more. "This behavior is unacceptable," he said firmly. "We will ensure this does not happen again. You need to reflect on how you treat passengers regardless of who they are." The attendant's silence said it all. She had learned her lesson the hardest way, publicly, and in front of a crowd whose moral support had entirely sided with Manny. Manny and his family were finally allowed to board. Passengers stepped aside, many offering quiet nods of respect or whispered words of admiration. The crowd's energy shifted from tension to celebration. Phones continued recording, capturing every moment of humility, courage, and integrity. As Manny walked toward the aircraft, he gave one final glance over his shoulder at the now calm crowd. A simple smile, acknowledging the shared human dignity he had stood for. It was a moment of quiet triumph, not over a person, but over injustice, prejudice, and disrespect. The video would go viral. Millions would see Manny's calm courage, the attendant's humiliation, and the powerful lesson about respect and equality. The world had witnessed a quiet heroism, and a reminder that dignity can never be taken away by arrogance or prejudice. By the time Manny Pacquiao and his family settled into their seats, the airport gate had transformed into a buzzing scene of awe and admiration. Passengers whispered among themselves, replaying the events on their phones, sharing videos, and marveling at what they had witnessed. Within hours, clips of the confrontation began circulating online. Videos from multiple angles showed Manny standing calmly, the flight attendant attempting to intimidate him, and the moment when bystanders recognized the global icon. The captions told the story succinctly. Manny Pacquiao refuses to be humiliated, teaches a lesson in respect at the airport. The reaction was immediate. Millions of views poured in, and social media exploded with messages praising Manny's dignity, humility, and courage. Hashtags like "Dutier Respect for All," Manny Pacquiao, and "Dignity Went Viral" began trending. People around the world were inspired, not just by his fame, but by how he handled injustice. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting how one man's calm, firm stance against humiliation had turned an everyday situation into a global lesson in fairness and equality. Editorials praised Manny for showing that true strength is measured not by fists or fame, but by integrity and the courage to do what is right under pressure. Meanwhile, the airline faced intense public scrutiny. Complaints flooded their social media channels, demanding accountability for the gate attendant's behavior. The company issued a formal apology, stating that they valued all passengers equally and that training would be reinforced to ensure respect and professionalism. The attendant herself faced internal consequences, a quiet but unmistakable acknowledgement that her actions had crossed a line. Throughout the storm of attention, Manny remained humble. In a statement to the press, he said, "This isn't about me. It's about showing that no one should be judged by how they look, what they wear, or their status. Respect is universal, and it must be given freely. We can all make a difference by treating each other with dignity every day." His words resonated globally. People shared the quote widely, reflecting on how often small acts of prejudice or arrogance occur in everyday life. Parents told their children about the story, teachers used it as a lesson in schools, and online communities debated how simple respect could prevent humiliation and injustice. Even those who had never met Manny felt a connection to his example. A retired teacher from Canada wrote, "I've never watched a boxing match, but after seeing this, I understand what true strength is." A young student in Manila posted, "Papa taught me how to stay calm when people are unfair, even if I'm scared." The story became more than a viral incident. It became a teaching moment, a reminder that courage is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes the quiet, steadfast act of standing firm in what is right is the most powerful statement one can make. Manny's family, sitting together on the plane, felt the weight of the lesson. His children whispered excitedly about how their father had handled the situation, not with anger, but with patience, humility, and moral strength. It was a moment they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. By the time the plane took off, the story had already begun spreading worldwide. Tweets, posts, and news segments highlighted Manny's message. Dignity, respect, and equality are values worth defending, no matter the situation, no matter the pressure. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance, type respect in the comments. Share this story and remember, courage isn't just about strength. It's about standing up for what is right calmly, firmly, and with dignity. Manny Pacquiao's quiet heroism at the airport gate reminded the world that true power lies not in fear or intimidation, but in integrity, respect, and the unwavering courage to do what is right, even in the smallest moments.